There we go. So Kathleen, welcome. Kathleen Hessert, welcome to the 2023 fall version of Sports and American Culture. We're super excited to have you here. So far, I've shown episode 1 of your brand breakdown video to the group and asked them to generate questions for you. So we're happy just to do 45 minutes of Q&A, if that's all right. Before we turn it over to their questions, could you just give us a little rundown on your company, what you do, and how you got there?
Sure. So I was in South Bend from 70 to 74. I started at St. Mary's. I took an American Studies major because I always knew I wanted to be in journalism of some sort. And so I had humanistic studies at St. Mary's, and I had American Studies / communications at Notre Dame. I started working in for the school newspaper and radio station. Had my first job in radio between my junior and senior year at WIOU Radio in Kokomo, Indiana. And right after I graduated, I went into television in Syracuse, New York at the CBS affiliate. At that time, there were extremely few women in television. In fact, the newspaper read the headline, "Station Hires Second Woman." Hard to believe during this day and age, but the reality was that I was only the second woman in the newsroom and the CBS affiliate in Syracuse, which at the time was the 49th market. What was more unusual, though, is that I was one of only 2 college grads. Most of the people in journalism at the time were from the newspaper, from print background. So there was somebody from Ithaca College and myself who were the only graduates. And I was the only one on the news staff that was from an entrepreneurial background, which is a very different way of thinking. I grew up in an entrepreneurial background. I was in news, so not in sports. So I was covering things like labor protests and blizzards and all kinds of stuff. The labor protests, it particularly stood out to me how different my thinking was, my entrepreneurial background, because I asked very different questions. I asked questions from a managerial perspective, like when a business person or organization sticks its neck out, takes risks, invests, they should get the return bigger returns. And that was a very different way of thinking. I wasn't in sports. I was with CBS and NBC in different markets in the Northeast for about six years. And then I moved south to a tiny little town in South Carolina called Lancaster, South Carolina. We called it the home of slightly irregular sheets, 40 miles from all the excitement you could stand, because it was a textile mill town. Raised our 2 kids. They were 18 months and 3 years old when I started my business, because I thought my brain was going to mush staying at home like that. And I was a very good mom. I was a horrible, horrible housewife. So in 1984, I started working with executives and government officials at the very top, the U.S. Navy, the CIA, the State Department, major corporations, on dealing with the media, crisis management, public speaking. At that time, they didn't call it personal branding or branding at all. It was image and self-projection or reputation management. And I guess it was 1988. And my brother was a championship race car driver. He had just won the Daytona 24 hours. And he sounded like an idiot when he got out of the car. And I knew it had nothing to do with his intellect or his willingness to support Porsche, which was his car manufacturer, or anything else other than it's just not natural to be able to, when you're totally depleted and you're your highest high or lowest low when the media comes to you, to be able to articulate what you think in a way that the audience will understand. I started thinking about my corporate and government clients, they were really exciting and different. I mean, I was asked by the State Department to go to the Gulf War and train the generals there during the war. I mean, I had really incredible opportunities when the nuclear power reactor literally melted down in Pennsylvania. I was covering all kinds of things. But I realized that in sports, every single day, sports and entertainment, my clients would be using the things that I was teaching them. So I bleed green. We're 5 generations Notre Dame. I went to the sports information department and the head of athletics, and I said, you've got all the best facilities, you've got all the best equipment, you give them the best coaching, but it is immoral to send your student athletes and coaches out onto the field without training in how to deal with the media and public speaking and things like that. Because every time they opened their mouth or didn't open their mouth, it was a job interview. So the very first media training for college sports was at Notre Dame with Notre Dame football the week they announced the NBC deal, which was very controversial at the time because every other entity in college sports thought that the Irish had a major recruiting and other advantage because we had, quote, our own network. But nobody told the athletes or the coaches what all that money was going to. And they were going to be the ones on the front lines out there that weekend. So we used the first workshop to literally prep them to respond to the issues of Notre Dame and the NBC deal and where the money was going and so on. And it became the first ever media training for college athletics. After Notre Dame did it and the NCAA News wrote a story about it, every other major program wanted it, knew they had to have it, expected it, etc. So the sports and entertainment part of my business just zoomed in every way, shape, and form. I worked with over 100 of the top D1A programs. I worked with, within 6 months of working with Notre Dame, the NFL hired me to design their media training. Within 6 months after that, the United States Olympic Committee did. And it was, it just was the most exciting thing you could imagine because it was this pinpoint of an idea that, you know, maybe this would really matter in sports and I could start the best, the smartest student athletes and programs to do it better, quite frankly. At one point, my clients were what I call the 3 Ps: P. Diddy, Peyton Manning, and the Pope, all at the same time. I was an early adopter in social media, so as a result, we became internationally acclaimed very quickly. I launched Shaquille O'Neal on Twitter in 2008. It was so unusual that the founders, every time Shaq did something on Twitter, I let the founders know, because at that time we got what was called the fail whale when Twitter went down because it was being overused. And I'm like, he's going to do something at NBA All-Star Weekend. He's going to be doing something here. Don't let the fail whale come out. And the actual founders of Twitter said that Shaq's emergence on Twitter was what took the technology from out of the hands of the geeks and put it into the hands of everyday people, because he was talking about family life. He was being his enormously funny and out there and authentic person, to the point that basically what happened was there was a person, a fan in Phoenix where he was playing at the time. And I had been telling Shaq, you need to get on Twitter. It's perfect for you. And one day, because I created a social media listening program to actually monitor my top clients and see what was being said out there about them to be able to guide them better, I saw that there was Shaq on Twitter. And I said, is this you? And you didn't tell me. He said, no, call the lawyers. I said, absolutely not. You are going to go on there. You're going to be bigger than this fake. And you are going to be a resounding success on Twitter. His manager said, why is he doing this? He's not making any money. And I said, because we are going to make him a global brand. And he said, he already is a global brand. I said, in basketball, not across the board. And so we literally ended up making him a global brand. This fan had a year-long script that he was posting, and he was sounded so much like Shaq on Twitter that the team thought it was Shaq, and the team was interacting with the fake Shaq on Twitter. Because within teams and leagues, certain departments can't talk to other departments. And if you weren't in player personnel or on the basketball side, you couldn't talk to the players. And so the person interacting with the fake Shaq thought that it was a real one. And I ended up going to the New York Times NBA beat writer and said, this is the real Shaq on Twitter. And literally his username was the real Shaq at the time. And the New York Times reporter said, what's Twitter? That's how unusual it was. It was early 2008. Wow. Well, yeah, it was a cultural moment, to say the least. And it was phenomenal. Because of what we did with Shaq, actually the Vatican contacted me and said, how can we take what you're doing in sports and entertainment and apply it to the church to better connect with young people? So when the Pope came to the United States and Cuba, I created the whole social media strategy and activation around the Pope's visit to the United States. I had a team of 60 millennials from all over the country, 30 in person, 30 virtual, both creating content, memes, having direct access to the Pope, or being in the social media command center to monitor everything and be able to real time turn the data into knowledge and insight for the Vatican so that they could make adjustments on the run while they were in the United States. And P. Diddy, his people called me. It was really quite interesting, shocking, to tell you the truth, because he had been everywhere in the media. He was a phenomenon, obviously, and he was launching his music network. And he called me in to help prepare him to announce the launch of his network within the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the business media. And he was scared to death, which shocked the hell out of me. And so I flew out to LA, and all his team was around him. And when I do media training, they used to call me Dragon Lady, because I got really, really intense with my questioning. And so he got very flustered, and he told his team, why haven't you prepared me for this? I can't do this tomorrow. And I said, yes, you can. And I told them all to leave. And I spent the next 8 hours prepping him for the business media, and then was side by side with him when he was answering the phone calls and doing the interviews the next day. So the last of the 3 Ps is Peyton Manning. Peyton still is my client, almost 30 years later, when he was deciding to go into whether he was going to stay in college one more year or go to be #1 in the NFL draft. It was his father called me and said, he's got a big decision to make. Will you work with us? And so I started working with him and wrote, in the last 30 years, every speech he's made, every major speech, done all the social media and business strategies to align with his business goals, etc. And people would always say, why would someone of the caliber of Peyton Manning want or need to work with you? And I said, because the best always want to be better. In sports, as you probably know, the difference between good and great, or great and off the charts, can be this much. And everybody who wants to be the best and will put the work into it knows that if they can identify one thing that can differentiate them from their competitors, they will be able to succeed. And so that's the kind of entities that I like to work with. The best. Yes, I've been called in on crisis when people have done things wrong or things have gone wrong to them, whether it be Tiger Woods or all kinds of organizations and individuals. But for the most part, I've been very lucky to be able to pick and choose my clients over the years and take only those that I thought would listen to me, would do the work that they had to do to be the best, and would make a difference in the long run. I am semi-retired. I live in Naples, Florida. I still have a home in Charlotte where I started my business, but my clients right now are the #1 draft pick for the Seattle Seahawks, and Jackson Smith-Njigba, and the bench coach for the Detroit Tigers, who just had his 18-year-old son drafted #1 by the New York Yankees and signing a multi-million-dollar guaranteed signing bonus and contract with the Yankees. And I'm doing a lot of work with Ukraine. So that's basically where I am right now. And I've spent a lot of time looking at and working with entities, consulting on NIL. So we can talk about that. We can talk about crisis management. My clients have ranged from WWE to the Rockettes to you name it, every major program and every major sports, professional and collegiate sports group or entity and brand. And the reality is that everybody needs to become a communication champion or they can't lead. And so that works really well.
It's a great
jump in anywhere, guys.
Yeah, great reinforcement for arts and letters education, right? I have tons of I just want to ask one question. So what's going to happen when you retire? Is the industry like filled up with people that do what you do now? You started a thing, right?
Yeah, I created a cottage industry, quite frankly, because I was working with I because of Notre Dame, doing Notre Dame football. Tennessee brought me in to do Tennessee football, and it happened to be the Ole Miss game coming up, and so I spent time alone with Peyton, and then started at the core of everything Peyton did. And then sports is a very small world. It's really, really hard to break into. But once you do, they trust you, they share you with their inner circle. So because of working with the Orlando Magic, I got Shaq. Because of working with Notre Dame, I got Tennessee. Because I worked with Peyton, he said, Derek Jeter, you need to work with Kathleen. And it moves like that. And because I've worked very closely with agents, hand in hand with agents and with teams and leagues and CEOs of ESPN, etc., they recommend me to others when they need me. And now I just pick and choose those that I think would be interesting and move from there. But there are a lot of people out there offering the services, which is good and bad, because there are a lot of people who are ill-informed and don't know how to teach it. Because they've been an athlete or a coach, they think they can do this, and that's not the case. Or they've been in the media, that's not the case at all. There are people who are in politics and now want to get into sports. I've had people with 6-figure incomes in other fields, very successful, say, I will take an entry-level job with you just to move into sports. So there are a lot of people who are very good, and there are a lot of people who are very bad in the industry.
Yeah, that's so maybe Eugene Lee, the NFL agent who's a Notre Dame alum. His company, Three Strand Sports, is a communications company now. He's expanding out in that area. But I would like to open it up to questions from you guys. So who wants to jump in? Anything's fair. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, speak up.
I can hear you, and please introduce yourself. Tell me your name.
Hi.
Camera's over there.
Camera's over there.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jack Gordon. I'm a sophomore. I'm curious, you brought Shaq into Twitter in 2008. As that was kind of expanding, what do you see as like an expanding platform for athletes to grow their brand today?
I think that I'm very disappointed at what has happened with Twitter/X, but I still think it has a place. But years ago, and in part because I'm a visual person and a TV person, I thought visuals would make a big difference. IG will be really big for a long time, but TikTok, huge. And that they need to be. I will tell you, the South Carolina women's basketball program that's coached by Dawn Staley, who is the preeminent women's basketball coach in the world. They're on TikTok all the time as a team, as individuals, and it's a huge recruiting tool. But I also think that anybody getting into sports needs to understand the technology, and they need to be data savvy. I recommend to anybody, if they can, to go to the MIT Sports Analytics Conference, because the movers and shakers in the industry are all there, and you need to understand sports analytics. But AI is incredibly important. So is personal branding, because of AI taking over the world. And that's really not an exaggeration. Personal branding is that much more important, because people want and expect authenticity, and yet it is incredibly difficult to know what is authentic and what isn't right now. So one of the things I did with Dawn Staley and Alicia Boston from South Carolina, and I did go to Notre Dame first, by the way, and asked, but it didn't happen, was I took Dawn Staley and Alicia Boston to one of 4 studios in the world by Microsoft, and we created holograms so that they could literally be in anybody's living room, on their phone, and talk directly to them, and vice versa. And we created holograms to promote COVID vaccination for young people, and promoted it all over Philadelphia, because Dawn is an icon in the Philadelphia area. So I do think that anything with AI and with AR, augmented reality, is something you should be learning deeply. The jobs that exist today, not just in sports, but across the board, 85% of them will not exist in 2035. So you've got to be thinking, projecting what the future is, not what you've seen in the past and what you've seen today. A lot of people ask me, how'd you get where you are today? And I said, it really doesn't matter, because the way I got here is totally irrelevant and would not be valuable for any of you, other than believing I could do whatever the hell I wanted to do, and that I could do it the best, and I would go after it and do it.
And your ability to communicate effectively, right?
Well, that's part of it, without a question. You cannot lead in any field today if you cannot communicate, period.
So they all had papers due today. So we just had a round of applause for everyone who wrote their papers and communicating effectively. But thanks. That was a great question.
Write it with GPT, please. You can use it to ignite ideas and different ways of thinking about things. But ChatGPT and Bard and the others, as important as they are, and as much as they're having an impact, they're like having millions of interns who can gather you any information that exists, but then don't know what to do with it.
That's a good analogy. Excellent. All right, more questions. I know you have them.
Anything and everything is open, please. Yes. Yes. Your name, please?
At Coogan, I'm a junior. I imagine when working with crisis aversion and working with top athletes, there have been times that have been extremely stressful, whether it's when stuff goes south, pretty much is what I'm trying to say. Have there been times where they're gotten to a point where people and their image have been unrecoverable, or is that stress and that thrill part of your passion in the field and that full circle moment of helping a young person out?
Whether it's a young person or an old person, whether it's a corporate executive or a government official or an athlete, my goal is to make communication champions in an authentic way. I have worked on behalf of Notre Dame and in a number of crises, but also in good times as well. In crisis, what thrills me is the challenge of when you're in crisis, any kind of crisis, leaders have three main challenges. The first is managing the crisis, which is extremely fluid. You never have all the facts right in front of you. They're changing constantly. Number two, communicating what's happening in the crisis to the right people at the right time and in the right manner. And the third is business resumption. A lot of entities, if they have a lot of people and a lot of resources, they're like, yeah, we can handle the first two. The third, when we get to that stage, we'll start putting things in place for business resumption. And that's not good enough because you always have to put things in place ahead of time and see what is it going to take so that you can get up and running right away and lose as little money, reputation, whatever you can when the time is right. So someone needs to be in charge of the managing of the crisis, the communication, and the business resumption. I find it very exciting to help them identify who's going to do that and how that ecosystem works. Because if it's a small organization, say we don't have enough people, we have to manage, things are moving so fast and they're so dramatic, we got to deal with this. I can't worry about, for instance, communicating with our employees. Well, your employees are your best ambassadors of goodwill. They have the most riding on you succeeding in a crisis. But if they feel like they're in the dark, they start wondering why, and they start doubting you too. So the communication, whether you have the resources or not, you don't have the choice of doing those three things as they happen. You've got to do them simultaneously. I love that. I love the challenge of what is a big crisis and what isn't. I do a lot of crisis planning, so I'll design crisis plans and issues management so that up front I identify with the organization what is an incident, what is an emergency, and what is a crisis, and who within the organization needs to be responding and in what way to those three categories. Imagine that an incident is there's a bomb threat in the state. The emergency, it moves up to emergency when there's a realization that there's a real bomb. And a crisis is when the bomb goes off. Well, if you don't respond appropriately to the threat that there is a bomb and who is at risk and how to protect them, if the right people, and it's usually the people on the front lines, not the big decision makers who first identify something like that, they have to get the information to the right people who are the decision makers in a quick enough manner and credibly enough that the decision makers will take the next step and take charge. So that whole ecosystem of crisis management is phenomenal. For instance, with a team, look at Michigan. Look at Michigan right now, Michigan athletics. They're smack in the middle of a huge crisis. Every day it gets worse in one way or another. And, who's involved? Who's responsible? How does the school respond? You can do all the right things. If you do them in the wrong sequence, or you take too long to do them, then you fail just like that. So really, really important. And social media not only accelerates the timeline, but the velocity that the news moves, the information moves, news and rumors, and how far they go, how quickly, and how it's extrapolated is just remarkable. So it adds that much more challenge to any, quote, typical crisis that might happen. And crises can be caused by you, and it can be caused by outsiders, but it becomes your crisis, and you still have to respond to it appropriately. I remember when I was, when Peyton and his father asked me to help them interview marketing agents. So for the first time, I was on the other side of the table, and they all came in and did their dog and pony show. We're going to make you Mr. Football. We're going to do this, that, and the other thing. Well, when IMG came in, the top person for IMG, he's, saying what they want to do for Peyton. And I said, well, what would you have done differently what did you learn in the Tiger Woods crisis that you would apply in the event, that Peyton is with you? And he says, well, what do you mean? It wasn't Tiger's crisis. It was, and basically what that crisis was, is that crisis that Tiger won the Masters, and then the guy who won the year before said, oh, he'll probably have chicken and watermelon for the champions dinner. And it became a huge crisis. And he was saying, well, it wasn't Tiger's fault. Well, didn't matter if it was his fault. It ended up in his lap, and therefore their lap, and they needed to respond to it appropriately. So all crises aren't caused by you, and aren't even intentional or negative in what started it, but it just, everything changes as the world has moved on, and expectations are different for authenticity and so on. And there's a famous line in a sports movie that said, just tell them I'm taking it one game at a time. Well, that's crap. Don't tell them anything. Just say I'm taking it one game at a time. Well, the reality is people expect more of people, and athletes and coaches and sports execs. They're people, and they don't just put you in a little box and say, they want to know everything. They want to know who it is. You put your money with brands that you align with, that may have the same purpose as you, and etc. I mean, that is the standard for Gen Z, quite frankly, and higher expectations than any generation before you. And so when a personal brand or an organizational brand screws up, you want to believe, or need to believe them, if you're going to stay in their corner. And that's really important.
Yeah. So you witnessed a lot of different crises in the sports world specifically, and how they've played out differently over time. I'm curious how you've seen issues of athlete mental health changing over the years, what advice you give athletes when they're struggling with different mental health issues, any sort of perspective and advice you have along those lines would be great.
Do you guys know the name Kevin Love from the NBA? Kevin Love was the first player. He played with LeBron championship teams, played, you know, in college. He's been a superstar, and his star is fading somewhat now. But several years ago, he was playing a game, a very, you know, I think it was maybe for the conference championship. And during halftime, he went into the locker room with the rest of the team, and he had a meltdown, and he didn't come out in the second half of the game. As you know, sports still is very macho in the way people look and expect the brazenness and the courage and everything else. And he was vastly criticized, first of all, for melting down, second of all, for not coming out and finishing the game. And then he decided that he was going to be the face of mental health for athletics, despite all the negatives. And he came out and he became the face of mental health in sports, and has started a foundation, has endowed a professorship at his college at UCLA, you know, for mental health for people in general, not just sports. But one thing I even told Peyton at the beginning, and tell all my clients, is, you know, as much as they want to know everything about you, you've got to save something for yourself. There's got to be one corner of your life or your head where you can retreat, and it can be private. And you need to decide that up front. You know, when NIL now opens the door for, you know, high school athletes to make millions of dollars, and they already are because of name, image, and likeness. You know, the pressure is that much greater. It's you know, here's the one guy that I'm working with, George Lombard Sr., is the bench coach for the Tigers in Major League Baseball. And he was a player, very successful player and coach for years. He's one of 15 people. He turned down an interview to be manager of the Mets and of Milwaukee this year. He's one of the guys that Major League Baseball is trying to elevate to manager level. And yet he came to me because he wants to be a better communicator and thinks he needs to be a better manager. And on the side, he's like, well, my son now makes much more than me. He's in minor league baseball, but he signed his signing bonus was $7 million, and he's got a guaranteed contract with the Yankees. And so the pressure on this 18-year-old is huge, and they all know who he is, and the spotlight is on him because of his dad as well, of his talent. So it's like, you've got to find something you're going to keep for yourself. I mean, the Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift stuff, I don't know how they'll be able to keep the relationship going, to tell you the truth. The spotlight is massive on them, needless to say. And from both sides. My son-in-law is Jason Sehorn, who is a huge star for the New York Giants, and actually was drafted by the White Sox right out of high school and played 3 years of minor league baseball until he decided enough of these buses, and he went to college and started playing for USC. It was a big star for USC, played 2 years there, and then was drafted USC, Southern Cal, and then was drafted by the New York Giants and was a huge star for them for many, many years. Jason came from essentially the hood in California and around Sacramento. And I've got him, and I've got Peyton, who came from a very privileged background, and they're both looking at NIL and they're saying, you know, it makes no sense. It's destroyed college athletics and high school athletics for that matter. And, you know, there's nothing simple and easy, but the spotlight is so constant because of social media on top of, and all other kinds of media, that again, you've got to find ways to deal with it. And that mental stress and physical stress is enormous. Our daughter-in-law was an All-American lacrosse player and 4-year starter at Notre Dame, and is her name's on the monogram wall. And then she became an athletics director after a coach for 1 year. So she worked and was the head of tutoring for Notre Dame athletics for several years. And then when my son and she got married, his job took them to Pittsburgh, so she worked in Pittsburgh in compliance. And then his job, he's in oil and gas, took him to Houston, and she started working as an associate athletic director for women's sports at University of Houston. She has a very different perspective on all of it from the inside, but she was there in the spotlight as well.
All right, let's take one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
My name's Matt Thorne. I'm a sophomore here. Kind of going back to what you said about especially expectations coming from Gen Z to have brands and people align with their values. When you approach a crisis that has immense controversy around it, basically whatever you do, there's going to be a large group of people who are angry with the result. I was wondering how you approach that and how you manage that.
The timing of what you communicate and the straightforwardness with what you say is really important. The Palestinian Israeli crisis is a no-win any way you look at it. There are situations like that in sports all the time too, not to that magnitude, obviously, but you've got to look at Michigan is in a no-win situation. When I've worked with crises where someone's been injured, or there's been, quote, abuse by a coach of a player and so on, I approach it by, first of all, I don't take any crisis client that I don't know first, or is it recommended by someone I know extremely well and respect their integrity. Because if I don't know everything, I can't help you deal with it. So the first thing I say is, you've got to tell me warts and all. You got to tell me everything. And then I'll help you find a way to neutralize it, if not make it, good on your behalf. And that reputation management is really, really important. And you got to look at the long term, not the short term for it. But knowing who you're dealing with and insisting on total transparency on the inside. And then, because I've been a reporter, a news reporter, an investigative reporter, all those things, not just a sports reporter, I know how to prepare them to answer, even when the answer is bad for them, to make it the best it possibly can be. But they have to be willing to tell me everything so that I'm not blindsided and can help them not to be blindsided.
Great. Any other questions? So before we let you go, Kathleen, are you hiring? Do you have any words of wisdom for students who might be interested in getting into the sports communications world?
I think sports is a phenomenal field to be in. Very, very difficult to be in. It is changing dramatically, but it has provided so much fun and richness to our family, in so many ways. I mean, when our kids were 10 and 12, we took them to the Olympics in Norway because Dan Jansen, the speed skater, was my client, and they saw sportsmanship when you lose and when you win, and they learned it in a way that they would never learn it anywhere else. One thing I love about working with people in sports, for the most part, they are willing to work hard. They appreciate the value of repetition, and getting that muscle memory, even if it's your brain is the muscle that you're getting going. And so when they decide they want help and that they're willing to take it and they trust you, they're the best clients you could possibly have. It really makes a huge difference. But know that if you're trying to figure out, there's so many avenues of careers in sports that people don't even think of. It's not just agent. It's not just a professional team. There's so many areas. I would definitely take the sports analytic program that you have available, the class in the business school, because sports analytics is only getting stronger. Learn about the metaverse and AI. Sports and culture is never going to go away. It's never going to go. It's built in. I have a program called Kids Connect Ukraine, where I'm literally Zooming with American students and Ukrainian students every week. And we have a KKU Slack channel and everything else. One of the areas that for their mental health that they want is sports, that they need. So it's inescapable, quite frankly. This morning, my 8-year-old grandson who's visiting us was doing a Star Wars Legos, 1,000-piece Legos thing. And I started thinking, damn, Notre Dame should do a licensing deal with Legos around the stadium. That's culture. Notre Dame sports is culture. It's not all there is about Notre Dame, as you can tell from the what are we willing to fight for pieces that are so important, that are up, at every game and are everywhere. We're more than sports at Notre Dame, but sports is definitely a part of the fabric of that institution, and we can show them what the best of sports is. And you are part of making that happen, because you'll have a different understanding and ethics and so on, and hopefully take it in a direction that's not so linear. Look at it in a holistic way, and know that you really can do anything you choose, especially coming from Notre Dame, because people all over the world know Notre Dame. They want to help. Notre Dame people want to help Notre Dame people without a question of a doubt. It's a love it or hate it kind of place, but it's much more love than it is hate. And you can make the most of that. And if you have any questions that come up later that you want to ask me, any comments, I put in the chat my email and my cell phone, so you could text me. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Let me know that you were part of this program, because I get literally 600 emails a day. And even now, even though I'm partially retired, and so make sure that I know immediately that we met through Notre Dame.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much. We're gonna stay in class for a few minutes after this, but thank you so much for your time, Kathleen. I look forward to staying in touch with you. And we'll get you on campus so that we can hang out with some more students in person. Thank you so much.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Glad to be there. Take care. Bye-bye.